Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I am Wendy from DME Business Assurance Malaysia. Thank you for joining the webinar session of today, which is for ISO 22000-2018. So what I will try to cover in this 1 hour's time is basically to introduce to all of you the new standards of ISO 20000 version 2018. We will go through the clause structure plus some key changes in comparison with the previous version, and in additional on how DME can support in your transition process. I've divided the presentation in basically throughout the 1 hour, where we have around 5 minutes on the introduction. Then I will go through with you on the new clause structures of the ISO 20000 version 2018. Plus, we will go a little bit in depth on the key changes of these particular standards, and I will hopefully leave around 15 minutes time where you have your chance to raise question. And in case if you do not know where to put in the questions, if you look at your, hopefully you are seeing the screen as per what I'm seeing now. You actually have a dashboard on your right hand side where you can actually click at the chat, and if you can see me typing hi to all of you, you can actually type out your question there. If I miss any of the questions, then you can just repeat. Okay. Yep. Thank you, Stanley. Okay. Okay. So this is basically the structure for the presentation of today. Next, we will go to the next page. Sorry, I'm still trying to familiarize myself with the note. Yeah. Okay. So for the audio quality, for tentatively during the presentation, you'll be muted. And then if you need to send out your questions throughout the webinar, you can actually put it at the end of the seminar, okay, where there's a question button. You can type up your question there. So then I will look at it and answer your question accordingly. So this is just a short introduction on myself. I'm Wendy. I'm based in Malaysia. I'm currently the Regional F&B Manager for Asia Pacific region of Business Assurance. I am also the lead auditor for the various food safety management scheme, including ISO 9001, and also auditor for EMS. So basically my background is I'm graduated in food science and technology with a master degree in food safety and microbiology, majoring in dairy industry. Okay. So we go into the introduction of the ISO 20000 version 2018. As you all are aware, the new ISO 20000 standards was newly published in the mid of June. Okay, so now you all have the ISO 20000 version 2018. Well, the aim of this ISO 20000 revision was basically to harmonize the requirements for all the food safety management system on a global level. Well, since year 2015 until now, ISO organization have been actively reviewing all their major ISO management system schemes, starting with ISO 9001. Sorry, I think just now the screen was suddenly off. Can all see my screen now? Okay, thank you. Okay, so back to the screen now. The ISO 20000 was being revised recently in mid of June. So we got the new version came out for year 2018. Basically, what happened was ISO organization have been actively reviewing their scheme from time to time. So in year 2015 onwards, we have received the revision of ISO 9001, ISO 14001, and therefore now the ISO 20000 is being revised. Well, the main reason of all this revision is to make sure that all these major ISO management system schemes are able to be implemented in the various different industry where they can easily integrate together. So therefore, the ISO 20000 have been revised to harmonize the requirement at the global level. And the standard itself, as most of you are aware, for all the food safety management system, it is targeted for the whole food chain from farm to table. And of course, being a baseline standard in the food industry sector, again, this particular standard did not state any specific criteria or any specific requirement. It is not as detailed as FSSC 20000 or BRC because it was not meant to be prescriptive. So from the start until to the new development of ISO 20000, DNV GEL have played our role as the technical committee. We have our global technical manager, which are seated in the ISO committee, ISO TC 34 SC 17, where this group, we have worked in the revision of the main ISO 20000 standards, also the related family, that is including the ISO TS 20002, various technical specification, which some of you may be using in your FSSC certification. So from this particular technical committee, we have finally, the whole committee have finally able to agree on the new revision of the ISO 20000 standards. And therefore, currently, we are also participating in the other working groups where we are going to revise the ISO TS 20003 revision, and also for the new ISO TS 20002 5, which is a technical specification for the storage and distribution. Some basic information on the ISO 20000 version 2018. Basically, the scope of this particular standards state that it is meant for organizations which are directly or indirectly involved in the food chain. So that means that throughout the food chain, if your organization is not a food manufacturer, but a packaging manufacturer for food industry, or you are a service provider which provide services like pest control or cleaning program for food industry, you can actually be covered in the scope of ISO 20000. So we come into a little more, a bit in depth in going through the clause structure of the ISO 20000 version 2018. In 2012, when ISO decided to have all the management system standard unified, they have decided to have all the main ISO management system standard to have high level structure, which we call it in short HLS. So they intend to have the common text and terminology throughout the standards. That includes ISO 9001, ISO 14001, and ISO 20000, and the ISO 45001. So the individual management system standard, whichever that you add on, will serve as an additional discipline specific for your specific industry sector. The main advantages of this particular approach is basically it enhances the compatibility of all the standards that your organization is implementing. And it is also enable your organization to have a much more easier integration and implementation in terms of adding on new standards in terms of the compatibility of this standard having the similar baseline as the high-level structure clause requirements numbering. And it also hopefully help the effectiveness in the future standards development, which they see that it is actually a value-added approach for all the user who is actually following ISO management system standards. So the new structure of the ISO 20000 will have the similar clause that you have in ISO 9001. That is the 10 clauses structure, where the requirements start from clause number 4, that is the context of the organization, then clause 5 being the leadership, clause 6 planning, 7 support, clause 8 operation, 9 performance evaluation, and clause 10 improvement. Well, basically in the clause 3, it only contains a number of common terms and terminology where ISO is using throughout all the rest of the ISO standards. And in clause 4 to 10, there are sub-clauses which are identical core text requirements. You may find it similar in ISO 9001 or ISO 14001. That was actually meant to be used across the standards. And they are in all these specific terms of jargon that we normally use in the food industry. It is actually further embedded in depth in the specific clause requirements, which we can actually see throughout the ISO 20000 standards as we look at the changes in comparison with the previous revision. So in clause 6, in the planning, what is actually being highlighted is basically your risk and opportunity. So in this case, in the clause number 6, of course, when we look at the risk and opportunity in the food industry, we are talking about food fraud and food threat at the moment. So if you are actually a food manufacturer in the food supply chain, or you are providing direct services like transportation or storage warehouse for food industry, therefore, most of you are not able to totally avoid from not having any control measure towards food fraud and food defense, because this is indeed a risk in the food industry right now. And where in clause 8, actually it contains all the previous HACCP principles, which is the 7 principles as per WHO requirements. So this is the ISO 20000 clause requirements in an helicopter view. So what is exactly new here is the context of organization, where I have put a star mark in the presentation. So previously, if you look back into your old ISO 20000 standards, we do not have the context of organization. So this is new to this is something new in ISO 20000, where the intent is to actually harmonize throughout the high-level structure among the other management system. Then the clause 5, which previously in the ISO 20000, we spoke a little bit on the management commitment, now is being termed as leadership and commitment, where the policy, the organization roles and responsibility authority falls into the picture. Then we have clause 6, which is the action in addressing the risk and opportunity. So these are basically all your risk assessment coming in address of your risk and opportunity in the specific sector of your supply chain. Then we have clause 7, where clause 7 now is looking into resources, competency, the training, your internal, external communication, and the documented information. Clause 8 basically focus, as I mentioned before, the HACCP principles, together with all the PRP requirements, your OPRP, then also your traceability system, your emergency preparedness and response, plus the verification portion of your PRP and hazard control plan, and also the control of the product and process non-conformities, where clause 9 is basically on your performance evaluation. In this particular clause, we are looking into how you monitor, measure the analysis and evaluation of your control measure, the internal audit, the management review, as well as in clause 10 are the improvement, how you handle the non-conformity, corrective action, etc. Okay, so in the standard itself, it also have annexure A, which it helps you to cross-reference back the new ISO 20000 requirements in comparison to the Codex Alimentarius. So this will be extremely useful if you are only currently certified against HACCP and you would like to consider on upgrading your food safety management system to ISO 20000. So this particular annexure A will actually helps you to see the correlation or if there's any extra requirements that you have to add in order to fulfill the new ISO 20000 standards. Whereas in the annexure B, it helps you to further look into the gaps that you have between the version 2005 and version 2018. So now we will look a little bit in depth in terms of the key changes in ISO 20000 compared to the old version 2005. Of course, the first changes is due to the adaptation of the HLS. So the main key changes in this ISO 20000 is now it is being structured in a high-level structure documentation. And of course, the other changes is there are further explanation and clarification in terms of the food safety management system specifically to the ISO 20000. So as a result of the HLS structure and the clause of the new standard, while this is considered a very big change in compared to the previous version. So for those of you who do not have ISO 9001 or ISO 14001 as part of your management system of your organization, so you will need to look into the new HLS structure and to see the gaps that you need to fulfill in order to upgrade from the old version 2005 to the 2018. Well, the other thing that is, of course, is the changes of this new standard is the expectation, the business contact, where now the standards actually ask the organization to determine your business contacts, external and internal issue. So this is actually similar to ISO 9001. And you need to look into the needs and expectation of interested parties. So in this particular case, it is important for you to start looking at your organization, the business context, and start identifying who are your internal and external interested parties, and what are the expectations and needs from all these interested parties, because then it will further help you to conduct your risk assessment, which is required in the clause 6. And of course, in this particular new ISO 20000 standard, it further emphasizes on the management commitment, where it actually ask for leadership in your management, including to have your management actively engage and also take into some process accountability to ensure that the management system is being effectively implemented. And the new standards of ISO 20000 is still very highly emphasized on risk assessment. So you need to conduct a risk assessment on how to, what type of action or plan that you have in order to address any risk that you may have, whether it is positively or negatively towards to your organization. So if I can safely say that is the new ISO 20000 actually have two level of PDCA cycle. So there's an outer level of PDCA and the inner level of PDCA, which I will further explain when I reach to the particular slides. Then the other key changes, as I mentioned just now, is your top management leadership and commitment. So these are all the expectations that is further clarified in the standard itself, where the top management is required to involve in establishing the food safety policy and objective that are established. This is similar to the old version 2005, and they are the one to ensure the effective implementation of the FSMS, ensuring sufficient resources are being provided in order to effectively implement the food safety management system, communication, evaluation of your food safety management system, and of course, the continual improvement and the other relevant management roles that come into it. So in a nutshell, that means we are expecting more and more leadership commitment that comes from the top management in this new food safety management system standards. So it helps to, it also strengthen the focus on objective, because now we are looking into more in depth on what you have in your risk assessment in terms of the opportunity and the risk, and how you are going to further develop your KPIs, your food safety objectives, to ensure that later on in the clause 9, you are able to evaluate whether your food safety management system is effective or not effective. And in clause 7.4, the other changes that we are seeing is there are extended requirements pertaining to the communication. So this is actually more prescriptive compared to the old version, because it also tells us a little bit on the mechanism of or the channel of your communication, including of what, when, and how to communicate with your supplier, your service provider, internally and externally. And of course, in the new ISO 20000 standards version 2018, there is less strict requirements for food safety manual, okay? So, but it is still requires certain documentation process or procedure or information where it terms as documented information that is in the clause 7.5.1. So it is actually the same as the previous version 2005 standard, where the documented information shall be controlled. So there's an explicit requirement to have a documented procedure. This has been removed, which now it only mentioned that the standard only requires the required documented information that is required by the organization in terms of the food supply chain, the position that they are in. A little bit extra note to follow is the HLS now does not refer to the preventive action as a term or clause, but the preventive action now in this ISO 20000 standards is basically spread out throughout the clause 4, 6, 8, and 9, because it is more of a risk-based thinking standard where you have to analyze your risk and opportunity, develop your action plan, and try to implement your action plan to have a continual improvement. So the documented information now is a new term used as a replacement of documents and records. And the terminology of management representative is no longer used in this, but then there is still a responsibility of role being addressed and explained in the clause 5.3, which we are going to look further into detail. So just now I have actually mentioned that the new ISO 20000 standard is in fact a 2 stages PDCA cycle implementation. What do I actually mean by that is, if you look at how the new ISO 20000 standard is being structured, you have your planning stage where you have the clause 4, the clause 5 of the leadership, clause 6 planning, and clause 7 the support, all the resources being fall into the overall planning of how to implement your food safety management system. Then in the clause 8 is more of the operation, the control measure on all the procedures, PRP, OPRP, and the CCP control measures that you have identified through your hazard analysis. So this is actually the do implementation procedure that you have to implement on site. Then the check is basically your clause 9, which is all the performance evaluation requirements. And action is all your improvement input, which you have detected after your performance evaluation in clause 9. So this is in fact the outer layer of the standard PDCA cycle. And when I meant the interlayer PDCA cycle, I'm talking about your 7 principles of HACCP, which in fact in the WHO Codex HACCP implementation, where you have 5 preliminary steps and 7 principles, you have your establishment of all your prerequisite program control measures or whatever procedure control measures that you have in place that is required by the organization. So the establishment of that particular control measure, where you determine through your hazard analysis, then you further validate if all this control measure is indeed effective and suitable to control. Then you put in your HACCP plan summary and your OPRP summary plus your verification plan summary. This is in fact a plan stage in the PDCA cycle. Then when you start implementing all the documented procedures that you have identified from your hazard analysis, your PRPs, your HACCP plan summary, OPRP plan summary, this is the do stage in your PDCA cycle. And the verification stage is indeed your check stages in your PDCA, where you have specific verification activities in terms of different PRPs that you have implemented. For example, when you have incoming raw material, you may have your QC testing where you conduct in-house. So the QC testing itself is actually an individual verification activity in terms of the incoming receiving of your raw materials. That is one of your PRP that you have inside. Okay, and then of course, upon having all these individual verification activities, you may have an overall verification activities review, like your internal audit, your annual trending analysis. So all these are the checking action in the PDCA cycle. And when you find out there's further deviation from the evaluation of your verification activities, this will actually require you to react and input in the correction and the corrective action. So that is the action stages in the PDCA cycle. So this is actually what I mean in this particular slide, where in the new ISO 20000 standard, you actually have 2 levels of PDCA cycle stages, where the standard itself, where if we look into the different elements of the clause requirements, that itself an overview of the PDCA cycle. And in the clause 8, you have your inner part of the PDCA cycle implementation. Okay, so the next few slides is basically to go a little bit more in depth on the specific key changes that is stated in the standard itself. So the first one is, of course, the scope. Now the standard actually specifically includes animal food. So food for animals not producing food for human consumption. So this is a new changes in the ISO 20000. So then feed, because what they meant is, if we talk about the feed is actually intended to be fed to the food producing animals. So that is the scope changes. Then in the clause 3, there are some definition changes to ensure that it is widely being used and standardized to have the harmonized definition. The first one is, of course, acceptable level. So the acceptable level, it is mentioned as a control measure is effective if able to keep the relevant hazard under acceptable level in the end product. So now what they have in the standard is the contamination is being used as a broader purpose, which actually includes the effects of the food fraud. And if we look into the definition of food safety, previously they are using the word harm. So now it is actually replaced by adverse health effect, because this they see it as a consistency with the definition of the food safety hazard. So it is also the use of assurance, which actually highlights the relationship between the consumer and the food product. So now in the standard itself, if any of you who actually have purchased the standards, and if you look into the definition on the food safety, okay, the whole standard actually reads that assurance that food will not cause an adverse health effect for the consumer when it is prepared and or consumed in accordance with its intended use. So the note itself is actually explaining that the food safety is related to the occurrence of the food safety hazard in the end product, and it does not include any other health aspect, for example, malnutrition. So we are not talking about food safety hazard that are caused by malnutrition. And in the definition of outsource, okay, in the new standard, they actually have a broader view on outsource. So previously, if we look into outsource, we may be talking about in terms of your manufacturing processes, where you may have produced your product in bulk, then you send it out to another manufacturer for packing purposes, and this particular packed product will divert it back to your organization for further distribution. So that is the outsource, which in the common understanding of the previous standards. Well, in the new standards, it actually meant to cover all the outsourced function or the process that is within the scope. On top of that, they are also looking into some of the services that you purchase, which may have impact in your food safety management system. Okay. Then in the clause 339, which they have the explanation on risk. So in this case, they are talking about the effect of uncertainty. So this is refer to the organization, because this is a food safety management system. So the organization are required to manage your food safety hazard. So the term risk is used at the management system level only, which is the outer PDCA cycle, to manage your organization risk, while in the inner PDCA cycle, we are talking about your food safety hazard, which your hazard analysis will serve as a risk assessment on addressing how you actually manage all these risks. Okay. Then the communication of the food safety policy, this is being explicitly explained that require you to communicate the food safety policy to all your employees. So that is being further elaborated in the standard itself. Then the food safety objective. So this is further specified that it includes the item, for example, consistent with your customer requirements. You have to monitor your food safety objective, and it has to be verified that it is effectively achieved. So please note that the food safety objective is not only about food safety objective. That means we are talking about the tool to eventually your end target is to ensure the product that you produce do not affect the public health. So now in the new standard, we are not looking into, not only looking into your food safety objective, for example, that to have zero product recall from the food industry, to have compliance in total plate count or zero E. coli or salmonella. So we are talking about your food safety objective from your business contact. Okay. Then in the clause 716, they talk about the control of external provided processes, products, or services. This clause is specifically introduced for you to control the suppliers of your product, your raw materials, or any other products which is supplied to you, to your organization, or it can be processes or services. So this, in fact, include the outsourced processes. So what type of services that we are talking about? For example, if you are actually implementing FSSC 20000. So in FSSC 20000, if you remember in the additional requirements, there is this additional requirement in management of inputs where you are required to control your service provider, especially those who may have impact to the food safety management system in terms of food safety. For example, if you have external contractor who actually manage your preventive maintenance, your cleaner, if you actually have outsourced cleaner, which these contract staff are actually based inside your organization, and you allow them to carry out cleaning program throughout your processing area. So these are some of the services which you may need to take into control. So this particular aspect of control of external provided processes, products, or services, we are looking into those services, product, or processes where you outsource to a third party and where it can actually impact the food safety impact of your product. In terms of competency, so in the clause 7.2, when we talk about competency, the new standard itself further explain, we are not only looking into competency of your own employees, but the organization also have to include your subcontractor or any other personnel which you engage to perform the job on behalf of your organization. So then this is in fact being explained more clearer in the new standards. Okay, in terms of the 7.4.1, when we talk about the communication, so in the communication aspect, they actually further explain on the decision on how to communicate, what to communicate, and actually who to communicate within your FSMS in your organization. And the 751, when they talk about the documented information, it actually relates to both how to operate the process, where this is similar to have all your documented procedures that you required of by your organization, and also the evidence of how this result is being achieved, that is in the previous standard is referred to records. So the extent of the documentation, of course, against in the new standard, it lets you vary depending on the complexity of your organization, and also the nature of the activities, where the organization can actually determine do you or do you not require this particular procedures to be documented. But however, in terms of the records, then of course the records are required documented information where you can actually demonstrate that the results are being achieved. Okay, so this I would say that not much changes, but in terms of maybe a little bit more flexibility. But of course, if you actually look at a bigger organization, if you actually are in a very big organization and your processes are very complex, it is indeed a better choice to maintain all your previous SOP or working instruction, so that you will have a better control and overview on your food safety management system. Okay. Then if we look into the traceability system requirement of the ISO 20000 standards, okay, now the clause requirements are actually talk more precise in the specification of the unique identification. That means the standards require a proper traceability system to be in place. You have to take into account of if you actually have rework being added into the batches that you need to trace, as included the retention time of the records, the shelf life, etc. So this is being explained more explicitly in the new standards. In the verification clause requirement 8.8.1, so it has further explained that the purpose of having the PRP verification is not to only confirm that the PRP is being implemented. It is also to ensure that whatever verification that you carry out for your prerequisite program, it has to be effective. So it is best to be carried out by persons who are not involved in the monitoring activities, which means that if you actually have the operator A checking the prerequisite program control measure is being implemented, or he or she is the one actually doing it, then the verification person should be another person. Okay. And in the evaluation for release, which is in clause 8942, so this is explaining when if the non-conformity of a product is related to critical limit or CCP, where you are sure that the product is unsafe and cannot be released. So this will require you to actually demonstrate what type of evaluation needs to be in place. Okay, and if the deviation non-conformity happen to OPRP, then what type of control measure again that the organization will have in place to evaluate whether or not your product is safe to be released. 8943 basically talks about the disposition of the non-conformity products. So in specifically, again, if the non-conformity is related to the CCP, so of course, you will need to dispose the product, or you actually are able to downgrade the product as a technical grade where it will not enter the food chain. Okay, but if the deviation is pertaining to the OPRP, where you may have further steps where you can rectify the deviation, etc., then your other control measure and the evaluation for release will actually come in as per the previous discussed clause requirements. Okay, so in 8.5.1.5.3, the standard itself actually description of the processes and the process environment. So this one actually explained explicitly the food safety team responsibility within your organization. So they actually further explain the needs to describe your process environment, your food contact materials, the PRPs that you require to be in place, and that includes if there's any different control measure that you will have in terms of if you actually having seasonal product or different shifting in the shift. So now this is being explained in a more detailed manner. The clause 9.3.1, 2 is talking about the management review input. So this list actually has been better detailed compared to the previous standards revision, which includes the performance of the external providers, your risk and opportunity, and also the needs of resources, which is an output of your risk assessment or the implementation. Okay. So that is basically the comparison of the changes of ISO 20000 version 2018 compared to the version 2005. Then I will go into the changes compared to the hazard. So if we look into it, so some of this point, I will go through it more quickly if you allow me to. The control measure basically now is actually the same. The elimination of food safety hazard is, they feel that it's not realistic. So they actually put in the definition of prevention or reduction of significant food safety hazard. So that are the changes in the definition portion. The definition for the critical control point are being further clarified to explain that it is actually a step in the process which involves control measure, and it is required for the significant food safety hazard. Where in clause 3.12, the definition for critical limit, now it is restricted to measurable value. So this is something different compared to HACCP. So what they are saying is if your CCP critical limit is not measurable, then it cannot be associated with any CCP, because when you term it as CCP, then your critical limit should be measurable. So if you are talking about non-measurable critical limit, then it is now in the new standard is more associated with the OPRP concept. Okay. So in, of course, the other changes in the ISO 20000 standards compared to the HACCP standards, the OPRP concept is changed and further clarified, where in HACCP you do not actually have an OPRP. Then in the clause 8.1, there is an inner PDA cycle, PDCA cycle, where in HACCP standards you only have this particular PDCA cycle. In the ISO 20000, you actually have an outer PDCA cycle stages. So this is something different compared to the HACCP requirement. For the clause 8.5.2.4.1, where we talk about the control measure categorization. This is on your hazard analysis. So they further explain that the categorization of this control measure is based on the risk assessment, on likelihood and severity, which actually the concept of the synergistic effect can compare to the previous version, it is less being considered. Then, of course, compared to the HACCP standards in clause 8.5.4.1, the HACCP previously we call our HACCP plan summary. Now it is a new wording where they call it HACCP control plan, because this is to further explain that in fact your operational PRP plan summary and your HACCP plan summary are actually part of the same plan summary to control the similar significant food safety hazard. So that is being further explained. And in the clause 8.5.4.2, the determination of the critical limits and action criteria. So this is actually the key changes in ISO 20000 compared to HACCP, where it better clarified the differences between CCP and the OPRP. Okay. And the monitoring system of the CCP and also OPRP, of course, in your HACCP standard implementation, you do not have an OPRP. So now in the ISO 20000 2018, previously in the previous version, there were a lot of confusion between CCP and OPRP and how it should be monitored. So now this is again being further clarified, and hopefully it will provide a better understanding to the respective organization who is implementing ISO 20000. So that is basically the overview of the changes of the ISO 20000 version 2018 in compared to the version 2005, and also to the HACCP standards if you are only having HACCP standards in place. And now we are looking into the transition process. Okay, let's see. Okay. So as usual, whenever there is a changes of ISO standards, the ISO organization give 3 years transition process after the publication of the date. Okay, so at the moment, the 2005 certificate will need to start your migration. Okay, you can actually start the migration of this year until to the 3rd year. Of course, there will be a specific cut-off timeline, which DMV we are still waiting for the final cut-off timeline to be informed to us from the accreditation body side. And for your information, if you are our existing customer, we are only allowed to issue accredited ISO 20000 certificate. So therefore, if you decided to migrate to the version 2018, then your certificate that will be issued will only have either the accreditation from RVA, ANAP, or etc., whichever accreditation that the DMV have. And this can be done in your scheduled periodical audit or recertification audit within the 3 years transition time frame. And according to the document IAF, which is the International Accreditation Forum mandates 21 version 2018, it has already indicated that minimum 1 auditor mandates is to be added when we are doing the migration audit. Okay. So how can you prepare for the implementation of the new standard? Of course, first of all, it is important for you to get hold of the new standards, because now the new standard is available in ISO organization. you should purchase the original standards from them. And then the next step is ensure that the personnel in your organization are trained and they are aware of the key changes of the new standards. You can actually start looking into the gaps that you may have compared to the version 2005 or the HACCP standards if you are planning to have an upgrade to the version 2018. And as you go through the gap assessment internally, you will realize that what are the changes in terms of the procedure, SOP, or the new risk assessment that you have to prepare in order to meet the new requirements. And therefore, you will need to further evaluate your effectiveness of the implementation via your internal audits process, or you engage a third party to come in and do a gap assessment to define if there's any further action that are needed for you to be ready for the transition. Okay, so this can be done internally, or you can actually engage external party to do it. So of course, from DME GEL part, we will continue support through providing seminars, webinars, and we also have e-learning, live training pertaining to the changes of ISO 20000 training. So this will further help you on perhaps conducting the training internally for your employees. We are also organizing the different level of trainings publicly and also in-house. So if there's any needs for you to have the trainings or the gap assessment from our side, then feel free to contact my sales team on this, or you can actually leave in your comment after this webinar, and then we will come back to you on this. Okay. So this is basically how DME GEL can further support you. So now I will look into my panel and open for question. Okay, there is someone who actually asked, how about the changes of ISO 20000 version 2018 compared to the FSSC 20000 version 4.1. Okay, FSSC actually have launched a guidance document, a gap assessment checklist in their website, where they have started to look into the changes, the gaps that they have compared to the ISO 20000 version 2018. And to be honest, when I looked into it, the changes are not that much, except that now in the new ISO 20000, if FSSC adopt the new ISO 20000 version 2018, we would be expecting you to have the context of the organization, the risk assessment of the risk and the opportunity in your management system of your FSSC 20000. Anyone have any more questions? Sorry, from Minta Say. So in new standard, when critical limit deviation on CCP, a product cannot be released even though the verification of the product is within the specification. Well, from the definition itself, it actually looks as if it's like that. But of course, this, I would say that is also open for discussion when the auditor is on site. Because sometimes if you look at the different organization setting of the critical limit, in fact, many of the organizations have a very stringent critical limit where, how should I put it? It may not be the actual critical limit. It's more like an operation limit that you follow so that you have another level of assurance. And when this, and because you put it in the hazard plan summary, it became your critical limit. Do I answer your question? So maybe after this, you may need to look into the critical limit that you have set in your hazard plan summary and evaluate whether is that actually your critical limit. Because if we talk about critical limit, that means when it's out, your product is no longer safe for the food supply chain. Chin is asking, is there another session of the webinar? Yeah, that is being planned. We will continually blast out emails when we have the next session being coming up. Any more questions? In the standard itself, there is no rules of how the shelf life of rework. So most of the time, the auditor will still need to look into the product category, the important characteristic of your product to determine whether which of the characteristic actually define it is safe or unsafe. Any more questions? If there is no further question, then I'll thank everyone who have attended this particular webinar. And if you have more questions, then feel free to actually email to drop the email to my sales team, or I can actually put down my email here. So if there's a need for you to further contact me on some clarification. Okay, I will put it in the chat box. Okay, so thank you very much for attending the webinar today, and I hope you have gained some information on the new standards. And if you have further question or any additional requests on our services, then to drop us an email. And we look forward to have you again in our future seminar. Thank you. Bye.